Council of Trent continues to make ridiculous claims about the Bible being pro-life and whatnot, using terrible science to back up his assertions. So it's about time he got skeptic. Hang on, no, I'm going on holiday or vacation, so I'm letting someone else handle this for me. Hello, I'm the Skeptic, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims, and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. Council of Trent does say some stupid things sometimes, and since my folks are in town, AJ from Ways to Human has kindly offered to step in and put this nonsense to bed. Keep it in the community, and go and drop a sub on her channel after this video. I'll put it in the description. What dumb stuff will COT say this time? Let's find out. However, before hearing Trent make a fool of himself yet again, if this isn't your first Skeptic video, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell, and hopefully the algorithm won't make a fool of itself. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. OG Yeti, Mikael Lundgren and Andreas. And a big thank you to channel members who get to use Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe and more hen emojis. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. Take it away, AJ.
Hey everyone, my name is AJ from the Ways to Human channel. My friend, the Skeptic, is off getting sunburned on some tropical island with a cold drink. So he invited me to cover an episode on his channel because, unlike God, I actually show up. Today we're talking about Trent from the Council of Trent podcast. Trent is a Catholic apologist who holds 3 master degrees in theology, philosophy, and bioethics, but all 3 of his masters are from Catholic institutions. He is also an apologist for Catholic Answers, which is basically Answers in Genesis, but for Catholics. Because he's definitely not a Christian, he's a Catholic, don't forget that. He is known for making very clear distinctions between Catholicism, Protestantism, and Christianity. Because how dare you confuse them for each other? And did I mention he's a Catholic? In the video I'm reviewing today, Trent Horn complains that pro-choicers twist Bible verses to fit their narratives and ignore science. Ironically, Trent goes on to misrepresent and twist science to fit his narrative. And let's get straight into the very first verse that he discusses.
So the claim is that the Bible teaches that life begins when you take your first breath because Adam became a living being when he breathed. And they claim this happens at birth, not at conception. But what's wrong with this argument? Many babies do not breathe immediately at birth. Some can take up to a minute to breathe on their own. This argument would justify infanticide as well as abortion.
First of all, calm down, Trent. Nobody is advocating for infanticide. Now, I don't know what kind of people he's hanging out with, but that is not a thing pro-choicers like myself are even discussing. It's a totally different ballpark. He left the field, the city, the state, and the country with that one. Now, Trent seems to be under the impression that if a baby is born without breathing within the first minute, they will be immediately thrown into the trash. But medical professionals and scientists have come up with a shocking test that Trent appears to be completely unaware of, the Apgar score. The first part of it is done at 1 minute after birth, for the very reason Trent mentions. Babies can take a moment to breathe on their own after they come out of the womb. The test is repeated then 5 minutes later, and so on. So Trent is twisting the science without having even looked at the science in the first place.
Number 2, the unborn do breathe before they're born, but they do so through an umbilical cord rather than through their mouths. Even before they develop their umbilical cord, the unborn absorb oxygen through the lining of their cells in a process called respiration.
He almost had it. He said it, but he didn't understand it. Yes, fetuses receive and absorb oxygen and expel carbon dioxide through the placenta and the umbilical cord. But the medical definition of breathing is the single rhythmic act of inhaling and exhaling air through the nose or mouth to facilitate the gas exchange in the lungs. Now, the gases being oxygen and carbon dioxide. But lungs are required for breathing. Respiration now is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, sure, but many organisms use respiration but do not breathe because they don't have lungs. The words don't mean the same. They're not interchangeable. We tend to call it breathing just to simplify the terminology. But if Trent insists on accuracy, then fetuses do not technically breathe. They use respiration to get oxygen into their blood through the placenta. And Trent himself said this in the video, but he insists on calling it first breath in the womb.
But we don't need the Bible to prove the unborn are human and alive before birth.
Now, notice that the text Trent had displayed on screen stated a distinct human organism. It doesn't say alive. And it's okay to say that we don't know something. Scientists have been attempting to determine when life begins for centuries. The reason it is complicated is because many other organisms are considered to have life, but we don't consider them to be conscious or sentient, even if they are self-sustaining. We still don't know when exactly does consciousness and sentience begin in the womb. But consciousness isn't necessarily required for considering something to be alive. For example, a human being under anesthesia, right, is not conscious, but we know that they're alive. And when an egg is first fertilized, it becomes a zygote. It is simply a clump of cells. And while it is certainly a human zygote, it is not self-sustaining. If its ability to stay alive depends on another human being's body, then it should be considered part of that person's body until it is self-sustainable, which abortion labs actually already reflected this until very recently, because they allowed abortions before 24 weeks of gestation. This is the time when fetuses will have the most potential for self-sustenance. That is how the time was chosen.
Because the science of biology shows us that after conception, which most scientists call fertilization, the life of a new member of the human species has begun.
That is correct. He did get that right. Human fetuses are of the human species. We know that cat fetuses are not human fetuses, which means they're not of the human species. But we also know that human fetuses in the womb have the ability to move, take in nutrients or oxygen from the placenta. But scientists also understand that fetuses develop a nervous system and a heartbeat while in utero. And in addition to all of that, we know that disconnecting said fetus from the mother results in the termination of those biological functions that we just mentioned, indicating that the fetus is dependent on the host, which will be the mother, to survive. Let's pretend for a moment that I am dying of some weird, mysterious medical condition, and I need a blood supply to stay alive. If I were to connect myself to Trent's blood supply, like in a sci-fi movie, while he's under anesthesia for a surgery, and when he wakes up, I am dependent on his body to survive. Is Trent required to spend the rest of his life with me tagging alongside him, connected to him with tubes and wires, and utilizing his blood to stay alive? Or does he actually have the right to bodily autonomy, despite the fact that I am now dependent upon him for my survival? He is well within his right to demand autonomy upon his body and have a procedure to disconnect me from his blood supply, regardless of what effect that will have on me. At this point, Trent goes on a rant about Exodus 21, verse 22, which gives instructions on punishment for striking a pregnant woman. Now, Trent states the verse never clarifies whether the harm refers to harming the woman or the unborn, and so the punishment isn't clear, which, to be fair, he is correct, because the verse has some confusing wording, referring to the mother giving birth prematurely and then talks about long-lasting harm. So it is pretty unclear whether it means the harm to the mother or harm to the fetus. After this rant, Trent goes on to make things much, much worse for himself.
This passage does not prove God permits abortion. In ancient Israel, slaves and children had less social standing, so punishments for harming them were less severe. In the verses before this passage, a man who unintentionally kills his slave through physical discipline is not punished at all. But that didn't mean slaves were property you could treat in any way you pleased.
Firstly, he is not wrong when he says that women and children have lower social standing. And we still see that today. We still see that today in the hierarchy of religion, where the father is the head of the household and the mother, then the children at the bottom of the barrel. But anyways, I don't think Trent's explanation did what he thinks it did. Slaves were indeed property. He forgot to display the rest of the verse, more than likely on purpose, because it did not serve the message that he was so badly trying to convey. The rest of the verse states that if the slave doesn't die within 3 days, the slave owner doesn't receive any punishment. So it actually doesn't matter how severely they were beaten, tortured, or otherwise harmed. The owner didn't get any kind of punishment as long as the slave survived past 3 days after being beaten to a pulp. Trent also fails to see the fact that the very text that he displayed on screen uses the term slave owner, and yet Trent claims slaves were not property. But owning something means it is your property.
Finally, let's look at Numbers chapter 5. Require a wife suspected of adultery to drink water mixed with dust from the tabernacle floor. Pro-choicers like Cenk from the Young Turks allege that this will cause a miscarriage if she has been unfaithful. But the passage in Numbers does not say that the punishment here causes the unfaithful woman to have a miscarriage. The passage never even says anything about the woman being pregnant in the first place.
This is typical cherry picking. He's given his own interpretation of his own flavor of Catholicism to fit the narrative that he wants to sell you. The verse says, "May this water that brings the curse enter your body so that your abdomen swells or your womb miscarries." What exactly does he think womb miscarries means? It has no alternative interpretation. Trent did not even give an alternative interpretation other than, well, we are not sure what it all means because it never says she was pregnant. But we do, Trent. A miscarriage happens when you're pregnant. Non-pregnant people do not have miscarriages. For someone who likes to quote science, he sure is ignoring it at every chance he gets. It seems to imply that if she slept with someone and got pregnant, then she would miscarry.
But if she didn't get pregnant, then they can't quite prove that she slept with someone, and so she's forgiven and will be able to carry other children.
But even if this punishment did cause a miscarriage, God's killing of an unborn child conceived in adultery would not prove that unborn children are not persons, or that we can kill them for any reason.
Giving someone personhood is not the same as determining whether they are of the human species. Personhood means being an individual person, right? You're given rights when you're born because you become this person. And someone who's dependent upon another human being is part of that person. So they're not yet an individual until they're separated from the person who is keeping them alive, in the case of fetuses, of course. And this is different from being a caretaker as well, like because anyone else can take over the task and keep that person alive, even if they're disabled or unable to care for themselves. They are still an individual person who is not dependent upon the body of one individual to stay alive. Now, in the case of a fetus, the mother is the only one who can keep the blood supply going to the fetus.
God punished King David's disobedience through the death of David's newborn son. God is allowed to end human life. We are not. So the Bible cannot be used to support the pro-choice position, but it certainly supports the pro-life position. God forbids the killing of human beings because human beings are made in God's image.
The issue with the idea that the Bible is against the killing of humans because they are made in the image of God and that only God is allowed to kill humans is that there are plenty of instances in the Bible where God is okay with humans killing other human beings. The best example are the laws that he gave the Israelites. Certain actions, such as teenagers talking back to their parents, or being a drunkard, or working on the Sabbath, even picking up sticks on the Sabbath, were punishable, stoning the person to death. Now, I'm sure Trent will argue that these were rules for the Israelites, and that's correct. But they still indicate that God was okay with humans killing each other for very small transgressions. Yeah, sure. The Ten Commandments later do state, "Thou shalt not kill." But there are still instances where one is allowed to kill, such as in self-defense. And as I explained earlier, if someone's life is dependent upon your body, then it would be logical to consider them a part of your body and not a separate life until that life can sustain itself without your body as their life support.
And we know from science and philosophy that the unborn are human beings, so it follows that abortion is wrong.
No, that is a non sequitur. It does not follow from the previous. Being part of the human species does not equal abortion being wrong. We're not denying that the unborn are part of the human species, which is our biological classification. This doesn't mean that they're fully developed human beings with autonomy and self sustainability. If separating them from the womb ends their biological functions, its body autonomy belongs to the individual sustaining its life. After this part, Trent goes on to talk about different historical figures defending the position of the church against abortion. And he gets to the point where he discusses when exactly are souls given to humans by God.
Now, it's true that the question of ensoulment was debated throughout church history, but that didn't matter because the church condemned abortion regardless of the answer to the question of when the soul entered the body.
The concept of the soul has no grounds in reality. It has no scientific backing, and it should not be a part of a serious conversation about bodily autonomy and biological processes. People talk about unicorns, dragons, demons. It doesn't mean they exist, and it certainly doesn't mean that they should be part of a serious conversation about horse biology or coming up with treatments for conditions specific to horses. In the same way that souls should not have any part in the decisions for legislations of abortion rights or bodies of people with uteruses.
St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas believed that an unborn child received a rational soul weeks after he was conceived. But they probably believed that because Aristotle thought that unborn children progressed through vegetable and animal stages of life before their bodies were animated with a rational soul and became human beings later in the pregnancy.
What a shocker. Humans were learning more and more about science and biology as time passed. And we are still doing it today. We may not have all the answers to all the questions, but we are certainly making progress thanks to better scientific tools and understanding. Now, maybe, just maybe, this is exactly why it's a really bad idea to be using a 2,000-year-old book to determine today's scientific understanding of fetus development, which informs laws regarding bodily autonomy. Trent.
It would be more responsible to believe that biological human beings have a right to life.
Wait, what? Biological human beings, as opposed to non-biological human beings? Or what now? Yeah, I got nothing. I got nothing other than Trent can't science. Please, Trent, stop communicating science. Stick to theology. And of course, if I did get any of the science wrong, just feel free to yell at me in the comments. But moving on.
And that is why abortion, infanticide, and other forms of homicide are wrong. We can make a solid rational argument against abortion from secular principles. But people who call themselves Catholic definitely can't support abortion.
I skipped Trent discussing a whole bunch of historical church people saying things that support his view that abortion is wrong. Because these are all extra biblical and they're not part of the scripture. Therefore, they're simply interpretations of his flavor of Christianity, or rather Catholicism, because did I mention he's a Catholic? No, just because one historical figure said a thing does not make it correct. Hitler said a lot of stuff we can safely say was wrong. But I do agree with Trent's very last statement that we can make a case for abortion from a secular standpoint, even from a humanist standpoint. Now, if he wants to claim that no Catholic can support abortion, that is fine. But it doesn't mean that all of humanity cannot come together and come to the same conclusion that abortion is a human right, because bodily autonomy is important. Now, before Trent goes around making claims that science supports the Bible as far as abortion goes, he should be able to show some extremely basic understanding of human biology and biological functions. Or at the very least, he should be able to provide us with some undeniable evidence for God's existence if he wants us to follow that God's law. Now, guess what? I have some evidence of God's existence, Trent. See how easy that is? Seth Andrews appears on toast, therefore Seth Andrews is God. Alright, I'm just kidding. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't be like Trent. Get your science straight before you make a fool of yourself. But if you enjoyed this, hit all the buttons below, subscribe to the Skeptic and Ways to Human channels, and always remember, life is not about being perfect, it's about finding better ways to human.
There you go. Clearly Trent has no clue about science or the Bible, and AJ handled this perfectly. Thanks again for holding the fort, AJ. Go and check out Ways to Human, link in the description, and bestow leaves upon her from the one true rainbow deity, Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe. Leaf be upon her. Do you think Trent had any good points? Let me know in the section below. I'm going to skeptic this as more science these apologists know nothing about. A big thank you to this month's top level ticks on Patreon: Dark Ether Piao, Tamo, the Barely Bearable Atheist, George, Godless Granny, Addy Rockhart, The Enixes, Jakari, Elizabeth, Whiskey Tech Fred, Rick and Ray, as well as all the $3 base ticks and channel members. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Or become a member by hitting the join button below this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.